Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was a revolutionary leader who dedicated his life to the fight against apartheid, a brutal system of racial segregation that oppressed black South Africans for decades. Unlike many Western-backed leaders who maintained economic and political ties with colonial powers, Mandela stood firmly against Western complicity in apartheid, as countries like the US and UK supported the racist regime due to their economic interests in South Africa's mineral wealth. As a founding member of the African National Congress, ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, Mandela initially advocated for peaceful resistance but later resorted to armed struggle when it became clear that the government would not grant freedom through negotiations. He was imprisoned for 27 years, largely because of his unwavering commitment to breaking free from white minority rule and Western economic exploitation. While in prison, he became a symbol of resistance, inspiring anti-apartheid movements across the world, including strong Pan-African solidarity efforts. After his release in 1990, Mandela played a crucial role in negotiating South Africa's transition to democracy, ensuring that the process remained peaceful despite tensions. In 1994, he became South Africa's first democratically elected black president, marking the official end of apartheid. However, his fight against Western dominance did not stop there. As president, Mandela sought economic justice for black South Africans, advocating for land reforms and policies to redistribute wealth, though these efforts faced significant opposition from Western corporations and financial institutions. He also prioritized Pan-Africanism, strengthening South Africa's ties with other African nations and encouraging economic self-reliance rather than dependence on Western powers. Mandela remained vocal about Western hypocrisy, criticizing the US and UK for branding him a terrorist while supporting apartheid. Though some of his economic reforms were met with resistance, he laid the foundation for an independent, self-determined South Africa and remains a global icon of freedom, resilience, and resistance against Western imperialism. Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara was a revolutionary leader who dedicated his life to liberating Burkina Faso from Western exploitation and neo-colonialism. After taking power in 1983 through a military coup, he immediately began implementing radical reforms aimed at making Burkina Faso self-reliant, economically independent, and free from Western control. Unlike many African leaders who remained dependent on foreign aid, Sankara firmly rejected it, believing that it kept African nations trapped in a cycle of debt and dependency. He famously said, "He who feeds you controls you," emphasizing the need for self-sufficiency. To achieve this, he launched an ambitious agricultural program that redistributed land to farmers and boosted food production, making Burkina Faso self-sufficient in grain production within just 4 years. He also nationalized industries, improved healthcare, and launched massive reforestation projects to combat desertification, all without relying on Western funding. Sankara was also a strong advocate for women's rights, outlawing forced marriages, promoting female education, and appointing women to key government positions, something unheard of in many African nations at the time. His policies were designed to uplift ordinary Burkinabés and free them from the grip of corrupt elites and foreign corporations. However, his defiance of Western economic policies and his refusal to bow to institutions like the IMF and World Bank made him a target. In 1987, he was assassinated in a coup orchestrated by his former ally, Blaise Compaoré, with suspected backing from France and other Western powers. Despite his short time in power, Sankara's legacy as a fearless anti-imperialist leader who prioritized African dignity, self-reliance, and economic freedom continues to inspire movements across Africa and beyond. Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba was a fearless and charismatic leader who fought tirelessly for the true independence of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, and against Western imperialism. As the first democratically elected prime minister of the DRC in 1960, he was determined to free his country from the lingering grip of Belgian colonial rule, which sought to maintain economic and political control even after granting formal independence. Lumumba openly condemned Western exploitation of Congo's vast natural resources, particularly its minerals, which had long been plundered by foreign power. He called for national unity, economic independence, and the rightful ownership of the country's wealth by its own people. However, his vision of an independent Congo, free from Western interference, made him a direct threat to Belgium, the United States, and other Western nations that sought to control the region's resources. When the mineral-rich province of Katanga attempted to secede with Belgian backing, Lumumba saw it as an orchestrated attempt by foreign powers to weaken the newly independent Congo. He turned to the United Nations for help, but when they refused refused to intervene, he sought assistance from the Soviet Union, a move that alarmed the US during the Cold War. Western nations quickly labeled him a communist threat, despite the fact that his primary goal was sovereignty, not alignment with the East or West. In a tragic turn of events, Lumumba was overthrown in a CIA-backed coup, captured, and brutally executed in 1961 with the involvement of Belgian forces and Western-backed Congolese rivals. His assassination robbed the DRC of a leader who truly sought its independence and prosperity. Though his time in power was short, Lumumba remains a symbol of African resistance against neo-colonialism, inspiring future generations to continue the fight for political and economic self-determination. Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was a visionary leader who led Ghana to independence from British colonial rule in 1957, making it the first African nation to achieve freedom. He strongly believed that political independence was meaningless without economic liberation, so he implemented state-led industrialization, infrastructure projects, and educational reforms to free Ghana from Western economic dominance. He built the Akosombo Dam, which provided hydroelectric power, and established factories, roads, and schools to develop Ghana's economy. Nkrumah was also one of the strongest voices for Pan-Africanism, advocating for the unity of African nations to resist Western control. He founded the Organization of African Unity, OAU, to promote African solidarity and reduce reliance on former colonial powers. However, his socialist policies and opposition to Western economic control made him a target of Western powers. The CIA is widely believed to have supported his overthrow in 1966, as the US and its allies saw his economic nationalism and ties with the Soviet Union as a threat. Despite his removal, Nkrumah's ideas continue to influence African politics, and he is remembered as a champion of African independence and unity. Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi took power in Libya in 1969 by overthrowing the pro-Western monarchy and immediately nationalized the country's oil resources, ensuring that Libyan wealth benefited its people rather than foreign corporations. Under his rule, Libya became one of Africa's wealthiest and most developed countries, with free healthcare, free education, and high living standards. Gaddafi rejected Western financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank, calling them tools of neo-colonialism. He attempted to create a united Africa with its own currency backed by gold, which threatened Western economic interests and made him a target of foreign intervention. Gaddafi also provided support to African liberation movements, including the African National Congress, ANC, during apartheid in South Africa. His resistance to Western dominance led to his downfall in 2011, when NATO-backed forces overthrew him in a violent uprising. His removal plunged Libya into chaos, proving how much his leadership had kept the country stable. Despite controversies, Gaddafi's efforts to free Africa from Western influence and ensure economic independence made him one of the most significant African leaders of the 20th century. Julius Nyerere. Julius Nyerere was a deeply principled leader who fought for Tanzania's independence from British colonial rule and built a self-reliant socialist society free from Western domination. After becoming the first president in 1964, he introduced Ujamaa, African socialism, a system that emphasized communal farming, self-sufficiency, and the nationalization of key industries. Nyerere rejected Western economic models, refusing to let Tanzania become dependent on foreign aid, which he saw as a tool of control. He also played a key role in supporting African liberation movements, providing safe havens and military training to fighters resisting colonial and apartheid rule in countries like South Africa, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. Unlike many leaders, he voluntarily stepped down in 1985, showing his commitment to democracy and good governance. Even though his socialist policies faced economic challenges, Nyerere's legacy remains strong as a leader who prioritized African dignity, unity, and independence from Western exploitation. Samora Machel. Samora Machel was a fearless revolutionary who led Mozambique to independence from Portuguese colonial rule in 1975 after years of armed struggle. As the first president of independent Mozambique, he implemented socialist policies that aimed to empower the people and break free from Western economic control. He nationalized land, industries, and healthcare, ensuring that Mozambique's wealth would benefit its citizens rather than foreign powers. Machel was also a staunch supporter of African liberation movements, providing military and logistical support to anti-apartheid fighters in South Africa and Zimbabwe. His resistance to Western and apartheid-backed forces made him a target, and in 1986, he died in a mysterious plane crash near the South African border, widely believed to have been orchestrated by the apartheid regime. Despite his tragic death, Machel remains a symbol of African resistance, unity, and the fight against Western imperialism. Ahmed Sekou Toure. Ahmed Sekou Toure was one of Africa's most fearless anti-colonial leaders, famously rejecting France's offer of continued colonial ties in 1958 by declaring, "We prefer poverty and freedom to riches and slavery." As the first president of an independent Guinea, he refused to let his country remain under French influence, which led France to sabotage Guinea's economy by withdrawing resources, destroying infrastructure, and cutting financial ties. Despite this, Toure pursued a policy of self-reliance, nationalizing industries and strengthening ties with the Soviet Union and China to avoid Western control. He was a strong advocate of Pan-Africanism, supporting liberation movements across Africa and pushing for the unity of independent African nations. Although his rule became increasingly authoritarian, his defiance against French imperialism and commitment to African independence made him a key figure in the continent's fight against Western domination. Modibo Keita. Modibo Keita was a committed Pan-Africanist and socialist leader who led Mali to independence from French colonial rule in 1960. Unlike many former French colonies that remained tied to France through economic and military agreements, Keita boldly rejected the French-controlled CFA franc, opting instead for an independent Malian currency to break free from Western economic domination. He nationalized key industries, promoted state-controlled agriculture and education, and sought self-sufficiency rather than reliance on Western aid. His policies aimed to build an economy free from foreign exploitation. Keita was also a fierce advocate for African unity, working alongside Kwame Nkrumah to push for a United States of Africa. However, his anti-Western stance and socialist policies made him a target, and in 1968 he was overthrown in a coup, believed to have been backed by Western interests. Despite his imprisonment and eventual death under house arrest, Keita is remembered as a leader who prioritized African sovereignty and fought against neo-colonialism. Laurent-Desire Kabila. Laurent-Desire Kabila was a revolutionary leader who overthrew the Western-backed dictatorship of Mobutu Sese Seko in 1997, ending decades of foreign exploitation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. After coming to power, he expelled Western corporations that were looting the country's vast mineral resources and sought to nationalize the mining industry so that Congolese wealth could benefit its people. Kabila also resisted Western-backed interventions in the region, forming alliances with neighboring African nations to fight off foreign interference. His defiance of Western interests and his efforts to reclaim Congo's natural wealth made him a major enemy of global powers. In 2001, he was assassinated under mysterious circumstances, with many believing foreign intelligence agencies and multinational corporations played a role in his death. Despite his short time in power, Kabila's fight for economic independence and African self-determination left a lasting impact on the Congo and the broader struggle against neo-colonialism. Agostinho Neto. Agostinho Neto was the first president of independent Angola and a key leader in the fight against Portuguese colonial rule. As the leader of the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, he spent years organizing armed resistance against Portuguese forces, leading to Angola's independence in 1975. After independence, Neto rejected Western influence and aligned Angola with the Soviet Union and Cuba, who supported his government against Western-backed rebel groups, including the US-supported UNITA movement. He nationalized industries and promoted education, healthcare, and economic self-sufficiency for Angolans. Neto also played a crucial role in supporting other African liberation movements, providing assistance to anti-apartheid fighters in South Africa and Namibia. His presidency was marked by efforts to protect Angola's natural wealth from foreign control and build a strong, independent nation. Though he passed away in 1979, his legacy as a fighter against colonialism and Western exploitation remains strong in Angola's history. I know you were expecting more video like this. So, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world, and it helps me bringing you more content.